Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, RegisKillbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are my rankings for the best Knights of the Frozen Throne Death Knight hero cards. Now, of course, at the time of this video's posting, the expansion hasn't actually come out yet, so I'm completely speculating here. I'm just basing this off what I think the best Death Knight hero cards will be. Of course, I could be completely wrong, but I'm going to share my evidence and my understanding of these cards and explain to you why I think they belong in this order. I do have to say that for this video, I thought it was harder to rank these cards from worst to best than any other ranking video I've done before. I think a lot of them are very close and very hard to differentiate as far as their overall impact will be on the meta. So some interesting decisions here. You might be surprised by a few of these rankings. But all that said, let's go ahead and jump into this list, starting off with what I think will be the worst Death Knight hero card, and of course moving towards the best Death Knight hero card. So right off the bat, this is one that will surprise some people because I've seen a lot of opinions out there that suggest Frostlich Jaina will actually be a strong Death Knight hero card. I think I saw a poll where basically people were giving her about 4 out of 5 stars on average. I actually reviewed this card at 1 star, and I still think she's a fairly weak card because, unfortunately for me, Frostlich Jaina just looks too slow. This 9 mana card, all it does the turn you play it is give you a little bit of armor and summon a minion that doesn't really impact the board immediately. In other words, it doesn't have taunt. It's not a huge pile of stats. It's not removing something right away. And then when you move to Jaina's hero power, it's admittedly strong if it works. Whenever you kill something with it, summoning a water elemental for 2 mana and getting the ping effect still are amazing, especially when all your water elementals have lifesteal. But lifesteal itself is still a slow mechanic. It takes multiple turns of attacking to gain lifesteal over multiple instances. In other words, the water elemental you summon off the battlecry might get to attack the following turn for a total of 3 health gained, which is still a very small amount. And then the Icy Touch, remember, every time it summons a water elemental, it doesn't get to attack until the next turn. So I think it's a very snowball-y effect, some pun intended. It takes just too long to really get up to steam. And I feel like a lot of other decks are just going to steamroll you in the meantime. Not to mention the fact that although 1 damage as a ping is good, it's not always necessarily going to be used to kill something very successfully. So you're not even always going to get the water elemental, and then it's just a regular ping. So I'm always a little surprised people still think this card's going to be strong. Clearly, when it works, it's going to be a value train, and you're just going to get a huge amount of value. So in control environments where you're going control v control in a super heavy control meta, yes, I understand why Frostlich Jaina would be good, but historically that's something we've never seen in Hearthstone. And frankly, if you get to a position where on turn 9 all of this works and you have time to do it, you were probably winning the game anyway, or at least very far ahead. And I'm not sure this is the kind of card that would be good in any other scenario. So a bit of a win more card, a really slow card, a value trap card in my mind. So I like Frostlich Jaina. I want her to succeed. I love slow cards like this one. I love value cards like this one. But my instincts tell me she's just too darn slow. So up next is Valeera the Holo. And frankly, moving forward, this is already where it starts to get difficult. The next 4 or 5 cards could all be at similar spots, but I'll tell you why I put Valeera the Holo at the 8th spot, or the second worst of the Death Knight hero cards, and that's just because I think she's going to be the hardest to use. I actually think her effect is really strong. I think the Shadow Reflection mechanic is a really fun design that opens up some interesting potentials with burst combo damage, and Rogue has historically already been about doing burst combos, and I think all of that fits the class really well. The artwork's awesome. The stealth mechanic is amazing. It's all great. I just don't think this is the sort of card you just drop into a lot of different decks. I think you very specifically have to build a deck designed to utilize Valeera the Holo with cheap cards that really benefit from the Shadow Reflection aspect. So because of that more specific utility and the fact that this is not a general value card or a card that just goes into every version of the class, I think I moved her a little farther down the list because it's just going to be so hard to make her work really well. So moving on to the number 7 spot is a card that might surprise people again, because once again I've seen a lot of praise for Blood Reaver Gul'dan, and I really do understand why on this one, and I'm a little bit torn myself, because a battle cry that summons a ton of stuff, as we've seen with cards like N'Zoth, is really, really strong. You get a bunch of demons on the board when you play Blood Reaver Gul'dan. My biggest complaint there, and my challenge for Blood Reaver Gul'dan, is including a bunch of good demons in your deck is not something that's ever been successful, maybe outside of wild format before, because, you know, a lot of the demons have big downsides and don't always work well together. My other issue is not a lot of the demons you'd want to run have taunt, so this is a big risk of a play sometimes where you can summon a bunch of stuff, but if you're dead, and your opponent can just outright kill you. The next problem is that demons, when they die, they die. It's not like Death Rattles with N'Zoth where they have some sort of resiliency or extra value they pass you back when they're resummoned. So if your opponent has a board wipe, you've just wasted your entire 10 mana turn on Blood Reaver Gul'dan. You get a little armor, and of course you get a great hero power, which is what I do love most about Blood Reaver Gul'dan. I think this hero power is absolutely insane. I don't know that it's necessarily worth giving up an entire turn, though, if your opponent does have a Brawl or a Twisting Nether or some sort of other really efficient board wipe, maybe just a Flame Strike that deals with all your stuff. So that's my issues here. I think it's going to be hard to find opportunities where playing this is completely safe, or finding a meta that doesn't adapt itself to a Blood Reaver Gul'dan dominance, and then therefore kind of make Blood Reaver Gul'dan worse as it goes. But if this hero power is strong enough to carry, which it could be, because a 6 damage swing like that where you deal 3 and gain 3 gives you a lot of power over the course of a long-term game. So it would be great in control environments. It provides a ton of pressure, provides a lot of defensive capabilities as well. So Blood Reaver Gul'dan, I clearly see it. It makes sense. I just think there are some big issues to overcome for this card to find success. But that hero power can possibly do it just because I think it's so strong. So up next on my list is Deathstalker Rexxar, a card which most people probably don't consider better than Blood Reaver Gul'dan or Frostlich Jaina, but to me I think it is because it's much cheaper than many of the other Death Knights at 6 mana, which makes it a really flexible card that can be run in a variety of lists. So in my mind, for instance, Deathstalker Rexxar is a great fit for Control Hunter if that were to become a thing. I'm not sure that it will, because that's never been a thing. I think it got more tools in this expansion to become a thing than ever before, so I have high hopes. But even if that's not a thing, I think Deathstalker Rexxar still fits in a mid-range Hunter deck as one of your top-end cards. We've seen cards like Savannah Highmane in that slot before, and the reason for that is that mid-range Hunter has always been a deck that's sort of run out of resources. Typically you run out of cards and you just can't keep putting good stuff onto the board, but Deathstalker Rexxar eliminates that problem with this build to beast hero power. It's basically a life tap that draws you a really good beast every single turn so that you can continually keep applying pressure onto the board, except for the turn you play Deathstalker Rexxar. But given that this battlecry in Deathstalker Rexxar is, you know, a Consecration, a Blizzard, a card essentially that deals with a small board of your opponent's stuff, it's a swingy enough card that if you have a couple small minions on board, you can probably trade up, clear your opponent's board, and sort of reset the game where you're maybe only a turn or half a turn behind, and these really powerful zombies can essentially bring you to victory just because they can do so much in a single card. Plus, if you build your deck correctly and you can draw other cards to assist your zombies in any given turn, I think this gives Hunter a sort of win condition that they've never had before in the mid to late game. So I like Deathstalker Rexxar for that reason, and because he's got some swing potential with that battle cry. It's a good AoE effect. I mean, Blizzard and Consecration are great cards. We've seen that before. I don't think the armor aspect matters a lot here, but the fact that you do have a little bit of mana left over could be important as well. I'm not saying you're going to be able to pull off a zombie the same turn you play Deathstalker Rexxar very often, but this comes sooner than turn 10 or turn 9 like the previous the Death Knight hero cards we've seen on the list. So I have higher hopes for Deathstalker Rexxar. I don't think it's the best by any means. Clearly it's still fairly far down on my list, but I think it'll be a surprise hit in the meta and make a bigger impact than people realize. Up next is Scourge Lord Garrosh. And I like Scourge Lord Garrosh because I think he has a really direct impact on the board in both his battle cry and with his hero power continuously over multiple turns. Plus, I think this opens up a lot of synergy potential for Warrior. So even though I do think this has some limited synergies, and it's not necessarily the kind of card that gets run in every deck, similar to what we saw with Valeera, I do think this has a faster, more immediate impact on the board and the game, and still fits what Warrior is trying to do more consistently than what Valeera does, so you don't necessarily have to build a deck entirely around Scourge Lord Garrosh. There are a lot of different ways this card could find success, just within a more narrow range, not necessarily Control or Pirate Warrior, but you could build a ton of different lists that still all do something good for Scourge Lord Garrosh, because with this Battlecry that Eclipse Shadowmourne, it's a great way to clear a board because you can essentially attack low attack things and still kill multiple minions with a single swing of your weapon. So it's a bit like an AoE effect right off the bat that doesn't risk as much face damage as you might normally do with a weapon, and you get to do that 3 times in a row. So if your opponent's playing anything with less than 4 health, there's a good chance you're clearing their board for 3 straight turns after you play Scourge Lord Garrosh, or at the very least really harming their board. And 3 straight turns of that's really powerful, because that's going to give you so much time to stabilize, particularly in combination with Bladestorm, because you can really do 5 damage per turn if you play this on turn 10 or later, or in the following turns you can do 5 damage after you swing and play Bladestorm. So you basically get a really cheap Flame Strike for 3 straight turns, right? You get one with Scourge Lord Garrosh right away for 8 mana that doesn't look that cheap, but is normally costed, and then you get Bladestorm for 2 mana the following 2 turns, and that's crazy. You're just banking Flame Strike value, so there's a lot of swing potential in Scourge Lord Garrosh. And then just that inevitable Whirlwind every single turn, activating your own synergies, but also dealing and helping you deal with your opponent's stuff and chipping away at your opponent's minions' health totals, seems really powerful to me. So I think Scourge Lord Garrosh has a lot of potential in a Tempo Warrior list, a Whirlwind Warrior list, whatever you want to call it. This card seems like, just because of that Battlecry and how strong Shadowmourne can be, that it'll be a big and impactful card in certain Warrior lists. So up next at the number 4 spot is Thrall Deathsphere, and this might be a little high on the list for what some people would expect, but again with Thrall Deathsphere, one of the big things I like about this card is its cost. It's not an 8, 9, 10 mana card, so you're going to have a lot more flexibility with how you play Thrall Deathsphere. You can even combine it with multiple other cards to make sure that its Battlecry, the super evolved Battlecry, actually gets guaranteed value, and there's likely, with Shaman in particular, multiple minions out on the board already. So I think this Battlecry, this Super Evolve, is going to be really, really powerful when it happens. Because, 3 minions makes that a 6 mana gain in stats on the board. 5 minions would make it a 10 mana gain in stats on the board. So you're not typically going to be sacrificing too much as far as mana is concerned. And if you can make some interesting trades or do some cool stuff, you might even be able to gain more by essentially healing your minions into bigger stat totals. So I love the Battlecry. Obviously, Evolved Token Shaman has been one of the most dominant decks in the Ungro meta. I don't think necessarily Thrall Deathsphere fits a standard Evolved Token Shaman sort of list because of its hero power and the fact that you're spending 2 mana to evolve a single minion. That's not normally what those lists would want to do. That looks like a little bit less efficient of a play. But I do think there will be Evolve-based lists, and there were even some interesting new Evolve-based cards that look like they're going to be strong Evolve inclusions released in Knights of the Frozen Throne. So I think you're going to be able to build a pretty neat, more mid-range looking list that really supports Thrall Deathsphere, and I expect that that will be one of the stronger decks in the meta at the very beginning, and maybe even throughout the course of Knights of the Frozen Throne. Who knows? I don't want to speculate too much, but this card, I think, has enough speed with its mana cost and a big enough impact with its Battlecry that it will be one of the more successful Death Knight hero cards. So now we're moving into the top 3, starting off with Malfurion the Pestilent, the new Druid Death Knight hero card. And this one is cool because I like the immediate board impact it can have with its choose one effect. So 2 Poisonous Spiders, I mean, that's a 5 mana card already, legitimately, with Web Weave. That's just a straight up 5 mana play, and then you get the 5 armor to boot. Or you can summon 2 Scarabs with Taunt, which I think are worth about 3 mana each because they're 1/5 taunted minions. So that's sort of like a 5 or 6 mana play. So you're not really paying all that much for Valeera the Pestilent. Now, I'm not saying either of those are necessarily strong plays. I don't think Web Weave is a card you'd want to run very often. So you're certainly giving up a little bit when you play Valeera the Pestilent, but still a kind of play that whether you're ahead or whether you're behind, it still gives you a lot of flexibility and some immediate board presence. So you shouldn't be sacrificing too much when you play Valeera the Pestilent. The cost is also fairly reasonable at 7, so you'll be able to do other things and get this out fairly quickly, particularly with Druids, access to ramp and innervate kinds of things. You could play this a lot earlier than turn 7. And then the real value there comes off of this hero power, which again, ultimate flexibility, and I don't think flexibility can be underestimated in Hearthstone. Being able to determine what you're doing and adapt to the game and the board state is really, really powerful, and that's what Valeera the Pestilent supports, because you can go aggressive with +3 attack, you can clear with +3 attack, or you can just hunker down defensively with 3 armor, making that better than the standard warrior hero power for gaining armor, not to mention the 5 armor here. So it really supports various board states, various metas. I think it's the kind of card you could slot into just about any Druid list, except maybe Token Druids. It could be a tad too slow for Token Druid, but honestly, I wouldn't even be totally surprised to see it as an option in that list either. So between the flexibility, the awesome hero power, the instant board, Valeera the Pestilent just looks like one of the more consistent and reliable Death Knight hero cards. Certainly not one of the flashiest or most fun. It's a pretty boring design, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. Sometimes the boring stuff is pretty good, and I think that's the case for Valeera. So now let's move on to the top 2, starting off with Uther of the Ebon Blade. Clearly a lot of hype around Uther of the Ebon Blade because of his hero power that, if you summon your 4 horsemen, you win the game immediately, which is the first true alternate win condition in Hearthstone's history. So that's really crazy fun. That's awesome. That's the big highlight for this card. I don't think that's why it's good, though. Let me rephrase that. I don't think this card is going to win you a lot of games via actually activating the 4 Horsemen's effect and just immediately destroying your enemy hero. But I do think that summoning a 2/2 on demand every single turn is a very powerful play. And I think the friction, that the threat of that hero power, so the threat that your opponent might just die if you get all 4 of those out, is a really powerful thing, because they're going to have to make inefficient trades, make inefficient boards, just because they're constantly going to be worried about you activating your 4 horsemen. And it's like, what if I don't draw the answer next turn? I might have to answer it this turn. Do I have to fireball that 4 horsemen? Those kinds of scenarios will come up fairly often. So just between the raw value of a 2/2 on demand, it's a really intimidating hero power. But then on the other side of things, I think the battle cry for Uther the Ebon Blade is actually really strong too. A 5/3 weapon with lifesteal can't be underestimated in a control environment. When you get to turn 9, 5 attack weapons still do a lot of work. We've seen that with Ashbringer before, whether it's just applying pressure to your opponent's face or making trades into mid-sized minions. When you can mitigate the damage you take from those minions with lifesteal, or sometimes just straight up gain 5 additional health when you hit the opponent's face, and that's a 10 heal basically from Uther of the Ebon Blade. I think that's a really valuable play as well. So the great weapon here that helps you stabilize, the 4 horsemen that creates a constant threat, both physically with stats, but also that ever-present doom hanging over your head with the 4 horsemen. I think Uther of the Ebon Blade, despite his high cost, will still be a great fit for most of the Paladin lists we see and understand as they work today, and probably the new ones as well. So Uther of the Ebon Blade is probably a card we're going to see a lot in Knights of the Frozen Throne, and that's why he takes the number 2 spot on my list. But he's not the number 1 card. I'm reserving that honor for Shadow Reaper Anduin, and this might surprise some people. I know there are some people out there who really like Shadow Reaper Anduin, others who aren't quite so high on this card. But the reason I like Shadow Reaper Anduin is really twofold, as you might expect. It's the hero power and the battle cry, both of which I think are very, very powerful. So first off, Void Form, I think that's what really carries this card. Being able to do 2 damage multiple times in a single turn can go crazy. And I'm not talking about like weird combos where you try to kill your opponent with 10 or 20 damage or whatever it might be, although that possibility certainly does exist. But just being able to hit one thing for 2, another thing for 2, a third thing for 2, that consistently means you control the board, you can apply a ton of pressure to your opponent's face, so much like I've mentioned with other hero powers, it's very, very flexible in how you use it. It can be a threat of damage, which Priest has never had access to, ultimate board control, which Priest doesn't always necessarily have access to, and it's not going to be that hard to activate multiple instances of Void Form. Raza, of course, makes Void Form even crazier, so that's one potential way to empower this card. But even without that, Priest has a lot of cheap spells that they play. The cheap stuff like Shadow Word Pain and Potion of Madness and cheap minions like Northshire Cleric. There's going to be a lot of scenarios where you can weave together 2 or 3 Void Forms in a single turn really easily without having to like stress about it. It's just going to happen naturally, and then that'll allow you to kill a 6 health minion sometimes, multiple 2 health minions, do 6 damage to your opponent's face so that they're on a clock where they might just be dead next turn, creating a lot of problems and a lot of friction for them. But I also like Shadow Reaper Anduin's Battle Cry. I think there's a lot of times where a super Shadow Word Death, where you kill multiple enemies all at once, is really valuable. Now, not every matchup is going to have 5 attack minions, so there is some limit to when Shadow Reaper Anduin can be played. If you're in a token matchup or an aggressive matchup, this card might sit in your hand a little while. That's the only big downside for me with Shadow Reaper Anduin. So, but Priest has other tools to handle those kinds of things, right? You've got Dragonfire Potion, you've got Holy Nova. So I think as long as you build your list the correct way, you'll find a window for Shadow Reaper Anduin. You'll be surprised just how often this Battle Cry can work and can really help you stabilize. And then, of course, it's a great counter to things like Jade decks, for instance, and even the most famous token deck of all, Token Evolve Shaman, essentially still runs a big Jade package and can get Jades up to 5 and 6. And they might run things like Thing from Below, which is a 5 attack minion. So even in that environment where they run a ton of small stuff, seems like Shadow Reaper Anduin will still find a turn or two where it can get some extra value, which is really nice. And then Void Form just carries you to the end. So I think we'll see all kinds of Priest lists, both Raza powered and just normal ones, fit Shadow Reaper Anduin into them because of the raw power of the Void Form and because of the swing potential of this Battle Cry. It's going to require opponents to really play in a measured way where they don't want to play multiple 5 attack minions just in case Shadow Reaper Anduin exists, because that would be too big of a swing and they'd probably lose the game outright. So even that threat and friction will empower Shadow Reaper Anduin to be better. So I just have a lot of hopes that this card will be great in all versions of Priest. I think Priest is actually going to be a really good class as well, and that's part of the reason Shadow Reaper Anduin's going to seem like the most dominant Death Knight hero card. So maybe going against the green a tad here, but Shadow Reaper Anduin, to me, best Death Knight hero card in Knights of the Frozen Throne. And there you go, guys. That wraps it up for my rankings of the Death Knight hero cards. I'm sure a lot of you out there think I got it all wrong. You probably think Jaina's number 1. Anduin's number 5, Thrall's number 7, etc., etc. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your take on these cards. Where do these Death Knight hero cards belong in the list? Which ones are going to have the biggest impact? Which ones are going to be quickly forgotten? Your insights are just as valuable as mine, and of course, I want to give you guys the opportunity to share those insights with the entire community, so please leave a comment below with your take. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.